All right, gods, gladiators, and Amazon slash Empire students, we are back for the thousandth part of the lecture on Athens. I do believe this is the fourth or fifth. It's going to be great. But so in this lecture, we are going to be talking about religion slash social sacred spaces in ancient Athens. Actually, but before we do that, I want to briefly pause and talk about the word barbarian because I'm getting paranoid that I haven't talked about this word. And I just finished the lecture on social space, social groups, where the word barbarian was used to describe slaves. So, really quickly, I know that many of you know this, but I just want to emphasize that the word barbarian in relation to the Greeks is not any sort of indication of their level of civilization. Instead, the Greeks called barbarians people who didn't speak Greek. If you did not speak Greek, to a Greek person, you were a barbarian. The reason for this is because to the Greek ear, any language that was not Greek sounded like bar, 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 bar. So, barbarian. It just refers to different language speaking groups. So when we say that Athenian slaves were often barbarians, that just means that they were taken from places that were not Greek speaking places. So I'm glad I said that. Thank you for letting me get it off my chest. And now we can talk about religion, which is a really difficult thing to talk about when it comes to ancient Athens. For many of us, this is going to sound just like I am telling you mythology. And the idea of the question of how ancient Greeks and ancient Athenians in particular related to their gods is very much an open question. Up until very recently, scholars said that an ancient Athenian did not feel the sort of faith and personal connection with their gods that modern day people often describe in describing their relationship to the divine, right? The idea of a personal relationship to a divinity, the idea of faith in a divinity most people have been arguing is completely antithetical to the Greek way of life. Instead, what scholars used to say, and many still do say, and I kind of agree with, is that for ancient Athenians and Greeks in general, relationship with the gods was not a personal thing, but a communal thing. It was something you did in public, it was something you did every day, but it wasn't as if you had to believe in Athena. It was more just like Athena was there and you paid respect to Athena. It didn't have anything to do with your inner life, but instead was manifest in the ways that you behaved in the world in which you lived. Um, that has been called into question recently. It's kind of cutting edge, religious theory. So it's just a difficult thing to think about. But what I'll be describing here is more just kind of external sign. Well, will I? I don't know. We'll see. You can tell me what you think I did at the end. I don't really know ever what I'm doing. So hopefully it becomes clear. But before we get deeper into this particular thing, this here is a modern day French version, French imagining of what the statue of Athena that was supposed to live, that did live in the Parthenon in the 5th century looked like. So let me put this another way that's perhaps better. In the 5th century, the Parthenon on the Acropolis was incredible. It was just a majestic work of amazingness. And we're going to be looking at it in the next lecture, the next little lecture. In that Parthenon, which many of us are familiar with as just an iconic image, there was a huge statue of Athena. And I am very bad at measurements, so I can't tell you, but it was huge. And we're going to see a recreation of it, like way larger than life size. And it was made out of ivory and gold. And it was just, I do believe it was considered one of the 12 wonders of the world was the statue of Athena. Could be thinking of a statue of Zeus that was very similar. But so this is an artist and it was destroyed. So we have no idea like what it really looked like. We just have descriptions of it. It was destroyed very early on. So this is a rendering of it. This is supposed to be Athena. And I just wanted to show you some of the iconic images here. So here's beautiful Athena. She has got a Medusa. This is called an aegis. It's a kind of breastplate that protects her. So she has Medusa, who notoriously turns men to stone with her snaky hair in the middle of her chest, and she is holding a little statue of Nike, the goddess Nike, aka Nike, the goddess of, you know, triumph. Yeah. So we're going to see other versions of this, but I think this is quite striking. The other thing to know, we're going to be looking at a lot of, well, let's not talk about it. Forget I said anything. I will talk about it later. So let's get into it. Religion. Oh, and here we get to start with my personal Tom Holland. I know the youths have a different Tom Holland, but this is another Tom Holland. This is the one I am in love with. He hosts a podcast called The Rest is History, but he is also a Greek historian. If you're at all interested, he's got a wonderful translation of Herodotus. He's written an amazing book on Julius Caesar. And he also has a really interesting book, speaking of religion, it's called Dominion, and it talks about how the rise of Christianity, essentially. So very good, very smart guy. But I really love this quote from him. He says, "The sense of the supernatural in Greek life is like the gin in a gin and tonic." The idea that it's impossible to separate religion, belief in the gods from all of these other aspects that we are talking about in Athens, because it was in no way separate from all of the other spheres of life. So when we talk about government, when we talk about history, when we talk about art, we are also talking about Greek conceptions of the divine, because there was just not a separation there. So like as I'm saying these words out loud, it feels like a little impossible or woo-woo to even talk about it like that. But the way I like to think of it, for me, having grown up in the United States in a very secular environment, the default is secular, right? Like when I look at everything, I just think this is done without the gods. Like this is done, in a spirit of reason and science, right? And and so that's how I look at the ancient Greek world, but really it should be the reverse of that. Like when we look at everything, we should kind of assume that there's some sort of divine influence or divine homage or divine presence there, rather than the opposite. So I don't know if that helps at all. I just wanted to say it. I thought it was a great quote, and yeah, we could move on. So here's what our book says in a much more kind of academic way. The boundary between human and divine in the Greek world was fluid. The gods had never distanced themselves from humanity through uttering authoritative revelations. There was no central organization on earth, no church, no sacred book from which dogma could be preached, no priesthood in the sense of a separate body of men or women who had a vocation and or authority to interpret what was correct belief or behavior. So what I think what this is saying is that for every single Greek, the gods were omnipresent. They were able to be interpreted. They were able to be appeased. So if you were just like average Joe Greek guy, you didn't have to go to a church or to a temple or to a priest or to a specialist to both receive messages from the divine or to give messages to the divine. So you, as average Greek guy, could look at lightning, right, and be like, well, there's Zeus. You could look at the sunrise and be like, well, there's Helios, right? And just it was around you all the time. And it was your job every day to give a sacrifice, to give some sort of recognition to the gods that you know your place as a human and you know your place in the sphere of divine things. So so there was no priesthood. You didn't have to, it's not like you didn't have to go to church. You didn't go to church. Why would you? You could just step outside and be among the gods. So kind of radical to think about. The gods that the ancient Greeks and the ancient Athenians in particular believed in included, the whole pantheon of Greek gods. And if you would like to know more about them, I would highly recommend you come to Intro to Mythology next year. But for the most part, the Olympian gods were the source of attention from the ancient Athenians. As our book here says, the Olympian gods oversaw most human experiences, those of the changing weather and elements, harvests, love and sexuality, which is Aphrodite, craftsmanship, Hephaestus and Athena, war, Ares and Athena, intellectual pursuits, Apollo, and the hearth in the home, Hestia. There was no important sphere of human experience that was not provided for. So Hestia is a great example of kind of everyday religion for the ancient Greeks. Hestia refers to is the goddess of the hearth, which for ancient Greeks would be like a fireplace, right? So every Greek home would have a fireplace, would have a hearth in the middle of the home. And so you would light that every day, and by so doing, you would be paying homage homage and thanking and being the recipient of the gifts of Hestia. There's many, many rituals about what happens when a baby is born, and like, you have to like circle the hearth 3 times. You have to do all of this stuff to kind of propitiate the goddess and have the goddess welcome your child into the world. Before the Greeks went to war, they would make sacrifices. They would ask for the opinion of Athena and Ares. And in case you're curious, I know some of us know this. Athena was the goddess of kind of the smart side of war, of the planning, of the like the nobility of war, whereas Ares was the bloodshed aspect of war, the violent aspect of war. Yeah, yeah. So. Right. I mean, I could go on about this all day. There's something, oh, well, I don't know. As I'm recording this lecture, there's this horrible, horrible snowstorm hitting some of the United States. And I'm just trying to think, no, not, it's not the time, not the time. Okay. In case you would like to know more about the Olympians, here we have a beautiful little family tree. In particular, I want to call your attention to this Greek myth comics for just like a fun, they do a lot of good work going through the gods. Here we have not only the Greek name, so here's Hestia, she's also known as Vesta, but where is Athena, also known as Minerva, our most important gods? All of they're called Olympians because they are all the children of Rhea and Kronos, the Titans. So, yes. So theoretically, for this course, what we would want to focus on is how do the gods come into human affairs? And so I liked this quote from our book. While the Greeks never believed that the gods were preoccupied with the behavior of the human race, there was a consensus that they would support correct behavior and revenge bad. So, and this is from page 239. So the idea here is that the the Greeks were compelled to behave in a certain way, not because of a kind of overarching morality, like it made you a good person if you followed the gods and a bad person if you sinned. Sinning, the idea of a sin was not really something the Greeks had at all, nor did the Romans. But there isn't a belief like, oh, the God is watching me, so I shouldn't, steal this piece of bread. Like that's not kind of how Greek morality worked. It was more just like if I do the right thing, probably the gods will support me. If I have hubris, which is this attempting to win honor for oneself by humiliating others, I will be punished by the gods. And we see this writ large in terms in the tragedies and in kind of the Greek poems and this sort of thing. But there was also this kind of overarching capriciousness of the gods, this idea that really, and we see this in Solon actually. If you remember Solon the lawgiver, the ethos is more just don't be too conceited. Don't pretend you're bigger than you are. Some of you may have heard this kind of parable about the corn, like the god cuts down the corn that is stands higher than the others. Like the idea is to kind of cling to the mean. The other story that I think is really interesting and is very Athenian, I think it's Athenian, but it's definitely Greek, is that there's a story about two young men named Cleobus and Biton. And they are just like nice, normal Greek youths, and they have a mom, and their mom wants to go to a festival or to a game, but she can't because the oxen that would normally pull her cart are in the fields or something. So she can't go to where she needs to go. And her two sons see this and they want her to be happy. So they pull the cart themselves. They put themselves in the place of oxen and pull the cart carrying their mother to the festival. And then when they get to the festival, the mom asks the gods, she says, please, my sons are so good. Please give them your greatest gift. And they say yes and both of the boys die. With the idea being that they have reached the pinnacle of existence. They have shown that they're good boys. They have honored their mother. They're being loved by their mother. It will never get better than that for them. That is the best they can hope for, so they might as well die in that moment. Which is a wild story, and I wish we could tell it in person. But that kind of speaks to the Greek attitudes towards the divine. It's not about massive achievement, it's just about yeah, yeah. Yeah, so correct behavior and be careful because if you do bad, yeah. So it's a lot. So, as for Athens in particular, obviously Athena is their patron goddess. In the Foundations lecture, we talked about how Athena created Athens by shaking semen off of her rug, off of her dress onto the rug of Athens, and they grew up. We're not going to read this particular tragedy in this class, but if you're at all interested, there is a tragedy called the Ion, in which Athena shows up. Yes, sorry, it was definitely Athena. The tragedy of Ion is about a young boy named Ion who was born after Apollo, his father, raped an Athenian woman. It's a brutal story. But Athena shows up just completely randomly instead of Apollo. And why am I talking about this? Oh, she just talks about how proud she is of her city. So Athena is very proud of her city. There's some variations in which Athena and Poseidon have to fight for Athens. Poseidon wants to be the patron god of Athens, and so does Athena. And so they have to fight for it. I don't know that story well enough to retell it here. But the point is, Athena fought for the city. She loves the city. She is the patron of the city. And yes, and so as we can see here from the text, the gods were housed in their temples, and here their statues arouse special reference. In the ancient Athenian Erechtheum, which we saw with the maidens on the Acropolis, the wooden cult statue of Athena Polias was said to have fallen from heaven. So this is really interesting. I love this particular story. So the smaller temple of the Erechtheion, which we've looked at least once before, was supposed to have held this very, very old wooden cult statue that fell from heaven. So we don't have any images of this. It definitely rotted away thousands of years ago. But before Athens was the huge, beautiful, amazing city that we're talking about today, there was one temple that had the small wooden statue that was supposed to be of Athena, and that was like her house, and they worshipped her there. It's amazing. It's just like this little remnant of kind of very, very old Athens. But then in the 5th century, we get these enormous creations of the sculpture Phidias, and I'm sparing you when I talk about Phidias, but if you want to, we can. So Phidias creates this huge Elephantine statue of Athena in the Parthenon. So Elephantine, the Crus is gold and the Elephantine is ivory. So that word looks very scary. It looks like it has elephant in it, but really it just means gold ivory. So there was a gold ivory statue of Athena in the Parthenon. There's also one of Zeus in Olympia that we're not going to talk about. And they were applauded throughout the Greek world. So you have Athens, this amazing city. You have the Parthenon, this amazing building on top of the Acropolis. And then you have this huge statue of Athena that is made out of gold and ivory. And this was something that people all over the Greek world talked about. So that's kind of how they showed their reverence for her. And she was everywhere, you know? Oh, wow. I thought I had another statue. It must be coming up in the next lecture. So, yes, that's Athena in Athens. The other way that the Athens people, the Athenians, kind of celebrated their gods was through sacrifices and festivals. Now we live in a world in which we have holidays. I don't know, like once every couple of months, maybe. We have our big one in December, and then a couple others throughout the year. But for the Greeks, sacrifices and festivals were pretty constant, like very consistent. There were some big ones that happened a few times a year and then consistently small ones. So the thing to know about sacrifices in particular, the Athenians were a poor people even when they were rich. They were not a affluent society. So people in general, the Athenians in general, did not get to eat meat a lot. And there's some really interesting work done on protein consumption in the ancient world and what kind of diet each of people had and how that influenced their success. I think it's really interesting. I listened to a whole podcast on how long it took the people, the Mayans to get a full protein. But for the Athenians, getting protein was actually quite difficult because they could not eat meat every day. That was just impossible. And so, one thing, one purpose of the sacrifice would be meat distribution. So, a sacrifice would always consist of the slaughter of oxen for the most part, as we can see here, this very sad beast of burden being led to slaughter. So, during the sacrifice, you would sacrifice an animal to the gods, and then you would distribute the meat of the animal to the people. So, this is a religious festival to honor the gods, but it's also a very effective way of making sure your citizens had enough nutrients, right, to go and serve the city. So it's kind of a virtuous circle there. So some of the festivals that were celebrated, the Panathenaea was just a, I don't know, a great festival in which Athens is in there. So it celebrates the city. The city Dionysia was this a festival to honor Dionysia. This is often where you would have tragedies performed to entertain the citizens. There was an agriculture festival called the Thargelia, so this would probably happen in the spring before they started planting. And then the Eleusinian Mysteries would happen in the fall after everything had been harvested. I mentioned in the last lecture that we know that women were able to go to many of these festivals, and in particular, there was one called the Thesmophoria, which was only for women. It was a 3-day festival on the Acropolis. Only women were allowed to go. Weirdly, the sacrifice of baby pigs was part of it. If you're at all interested, I wrote a very scholarly article about the Thesmophoria once. I mean, it's a fascinating thing, but it's a thing where women got to come together and hang out and be just in a, safe together. So I think it's great. So these are the big ones, spread out over every couple of months at important times of the year, according to the kind of harvest calendar. But then there would be monthly sacrifices by household, sacrifices by the state on regular basis. And then heroes like Heracles or Hercules would have cult centers where people could go and sacrifice. So let's say, I don't know, you're an athlete and you are about to go compete. You would go make a sacrifice to Heracles to help you achieve victory. And you could kind of do that, whenever you wanted to do. So these are just some ways in which religion popped up over Athens. And so we're going to look in a couple of lectures. We're going to read the funeral oration of Thucydides. I myself have done a lot of work on Plato, and I wanted to talk briefly about the difference between philosophy and religion in the ancient world. I don't know that this, I mean, this is kind of a niche interest. It's one of my interests. But Athens, of course, is where philosophy was born. The word philosopher arose in 5th century Athens and came to mean what it is. And we think now, I think now, of philosophy as something quite separate from religion. And as some of you may know, Socrates, our first philosopher, was executed. I mean, he was condemned to death because he questioned the gods. And I think sometimes there's this sense that philosophy and the kind of math and science coming out of Athens was not religious, was not associated with the gods. And I just want to give you this quote from one of Plato's later dialogues to demonstrate that there was no firm line, there was no real distinction between any of the art or literature or philosophy coming out of Athens and religion. So, as our book says, Plato spoke for the conventional view in his late work, The Laws, which I hope you never have to read it. It's a very difficult text. But in that very difficult text, Plato says, through the voice, well, not of Socrates, but anyhow, Plato says, to engage in sacrifice and commune with the gods continually by prayers and offerings and devotions of every kind is a thing most noble and good and helpful towards the happy life and superlatively fitting also for the good person. So there was a spirit of questioning and inquiry in Athens, absolutely, but there was still an overarching sense that to be a good person and to live a happy life, you had to acknowledge and pay respect to the gods, whatever that meant to you as an average Athenian citizen. So, yeah, I feel like this was a very scattered lecture. It might have lent itself better to an in-person modality. So, if this lecture raised more questions than it answered, or if it just raised any questions that you would like an answer to, please don't hesitate to reach out. I love talking about this sort of stuff. It's just kind of like more of a vibe, the way religion worked in ancient Athens. Then it's one of the most interesting things, actually, the idea that this was, a gods soaked environment, but you don't actually see it. And sometimes I don't know if the reason we don't see it in the works coming out of Athens is because it's not there or because we don't have the eyes to see it correctly, if that makes any sense. So anyhow, so that's going to conclude the religion part. I'm going to stop here, but then in our next lecture, we are going to be talking about art stuff. I'm hoping to keep all the terms straight. So come and find out if I did do that correctly. I've been practicing and I look forward to it. Okay, I'll see you then.